All right, welcome back, Jordan. We spoke a while ago, and I'm glad that you're able to come back on here now with the release of your film, Little Black Submarines. And so welcome back. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the film and how this project got started?
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate you having me on again. Uh, this movie's been crazy amount of work. It's taken 18 years of my life, or 18 years, not 18 months, 18 months of my life. Um, and it's just been this crazy, incredible journey of making this thing. And it's very hard to believe that it's coming out here pretty soon. I don't know when this is coming out necessarily, but I'm assuming before or after around the release. But as of recording now, it's going to come out at the end of the month. So I'm very feels pretty incredible and bizarre.
Yeah, well, congratulations. I mean, I watched it, and it was really an impressive undertaking. I could tell it was a clearly a lot of work had gone into this shoot. And before we get into that, I did want to ask, maybe to help set it up, if you
Hmm.
could talk a little bit about the relationship of this film with the film Chlorine
Hmm.
and the sort of connection there.
Sure. Um, well, in terms of its relationship to chlorine, that's slightly changed as we were writing the movie and as I was planning it out. But going into production and during the final shooting script, essentially, um, it's a sequel to The Mentor, and The Mentor is a prequel to the sequel of Chlorine. Um, it sounds very convoluted, but I promise it's not. It's more or less it's a movie set in the same universe as the Chlorine film. Um, the characters coexist in the same world, but I don't think you necessarily need to have seen the other films to understand Little Black Submarines. Um, it was one of those things we kind of accidentally, well, I guess not accidentally, the kernel, the seed of the idea, um, had no connection really to the chlorine films necessarily. Um, but it was in prepping and in planning this film out, I cameoed in The Mentor and I thought, huh, this would be a cool character. Maybe this is the same character in that film. And then as I was getting closer to writing it, I asked Nathan, who directed The Mentor, I said, hey, I haven't seen The Mentor. I don't know what's going on in it, but I have this vision for this three character piece where I have this villain, my character, and this female lead. Is there any young woman who appears in your film who could also appear in The Mentor, who we could inherit? Because I thought, if we're going to be in the same universe, we might as well have some connection. And then Nate told me Vanessa's character, Gloria, and that's kind of where it really became a part of the universe, essentially.
I see. Yeah, it's interesting how all of these films are interconnected. I'll say that as
Hmm.
I was watching it, I didn't feel, confused by
Hmm.
not having seen all of the films and that are part of this kind of interconnected series or
Hmm.
universe, if you want. Um, so can you talk about, you said that you spent 18 months
Hmm.
making this film. Did that include the writing and development process?
Yeah, I would say. I mean, if we're getting really technical, it's 2 years from like the idea coming into my head.
Mhm.
But I started writing January of 23, and then we hit export on the film on June 25th of 24. So, a year and a half, a year and six
All
months,
right.
pretty much. Yeah.
What was the production process like? I mean, again, like when I watched it, I was struck by how, I mean, it looked like it must have been a pretty involved shoot. Lots of locations, characters, and things like the car chase that you do with still images. And as I was
Mhm.
watching this, I found myself trying to piece together what it must have been like shooting this. Could you kind of walk us through the production process?
Oh yeah. It was involved. There was so much involvement on everybody's part. I mean, if you watch those credits, we credit there's a lot of people who do a lot multiple different jobs in this. And so once the script was written, well, I guess even before the script was written, planning had begun because part of how we work is we like to use what we already have. So I wasn't going to write a abandoned house if I didn't know for sure that we could use the abandoned house. So during the writing, there was a lot of location scouting um, to kind of see what elements we had. There's a lot of asking actors if they'd like to be a part of it. Like I think I asked Vanessa and David if they would be in the movie, and Brooke as well, before the script was finished. I think I was writing it, and I just kind of went up and said, "Hey, before I write this, are you all interested?" And they agreed, and so that was kind of what was involved in the writing stage. And then as after the script was written, um, it became apparent that it was going to be an all hands on deck situation. So there was a lot more delegation on this film where, you know, I think, oh, I wish I had it with me, but I had these giant pieces of paper with like all the elements of your film. And I had a Google Sheet as well where it broke it down by like um for instance, visual effects, special effects, costumes, makeup, casting, locations. I had all the elements you need to make a movie, and I had them in columns, and I kind of assigned different jobs to different people um, for pre-production, anyways. And then, so there's a lot of delegation. There's a challenge there because usually when we make movies, it's just kind of like the director does everything, and then the others will help out where they can if they're asked. But on this one, it was really like kind of, I said, Ethan, I've told you my vision for the visuals. What gear do we need? He's like, let me do some research, and I was like, just get it, and I'll send me the invoice, and I'll pay for it or whatever. Um, or I told Zach, I was like, Zach, we need these props. Can you get those props? And he's like, yep, I got it. And I just sent him the money, and he went on his way. Um, and there's even more stuff during production. Because as you said, it was a pretty involved process. I'm frankly shocked that we pulled the movie off. There's so many times when everything could have just fallen through and just collapsed, but it didn't because we had all these incredible people working on the film, bringing their skills and talents to the screen.
Well, that's great to hear that you had such a dedicated crew. What was the compared to the previous films you've done with the, Doomed Productions group? How did this one compare with in terms of just the number of people involved, the different responsibilities, especially if you could talk about this in relation to the previous ones that you've directed yourself?
Yeah. Gee. I mean, it was I guess the best way I'd put it is before going into this movie, well, originally during the first or second draft, there was 5 drafts of the script written, but in the earlier drafts, this was just supposed to be a little fun movie. We should get done in a week. I edit in a month. It was just going to be very small and simple because we were planning 3 other projects at the time. Those projects kind of fell through slash got delayed. And so once our resources opened up and our time opened up, I kind of went forward with the writing with the intention of we're going to do everything bigger and better essentially on this one. We're going to have more locations. We're going to have more action. We're more set pieces. We're going to have more characters. Um, Everything was going to feel bigger. And so, in terms of the different roles that, I mean, I guess specifically with myself, again, a lot of it was just delegation, but, um, and trying to bring together everybody's talents because everybody who worked on the film, they're crazy talented and they all have their amazing skills that they brought to this project. So a lot of what I was doing was just answering questions, kind of like you would do on a normal feature film, I suppose, where it is people are saying, should I do this or this? And I pick for whatever one. Um, but then there was also the like I had to make the schedules, I had to contact people, there's a balance of like when am I bothering people versus when am I just checking in? Because, some people don't like to be hounded with text messages all the time, but some people need that reminder and they don't mind and they like that. So balancing that and communicating. Um, on the creative side of things, I wanted to, I like, uh, I like acting and directing. It's stressful and it is more difficult. But in my opinion, I don't know, there's some part of me that loves the challenge of like, well, if I just keep doing it, I'll get better at it. Um, and so acting and directing was probably the most fun in this process. The production side of things was stressful, and it was rewarding as well when we pulled it off. But um, creatively, from an acting and directing standpoint, I think it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, were you the only producer on the film? Is that correct? I mean, were you handling pretty much all those responsibilities yourself?
I would say, well, I had my are the producers that we credit. There's Ethan and Zach, of course, and then
Mhm.
Caleb and Nathan. I I don't know because the producer role is such a weird thing that they just throw around in Hollywood. So I don't know what the exact role would be, but it would kind of be like, I guess the best way to simplify it, I made a giant to-do list and I gave some of those to do like those tasks to the other producers and they got those things done. And I would check in with them frequently to make sure they got done. And there's some things that I just did myself. Like for instance, well, I'd say casting, but Nathan actually handled a lot of the casting himself. But in terms of like the core people, so like me, David, Vanessa, I spoke with them directly. I spoke with Brooke directly. But then all the other people in the movie, that was pretty much Nathan's doing for in terms of casting.
Yeah, no, I mean it was really remarkable that you're handling all the production, kind of coordinating all those responsibilities, writing, directing, and
Mhm.
starring in the film. I'm curious how you feel that your previous projects prepared you for this, because I get the sense, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I get the sense that this is a film that in some ways you had to work up to in terms of maybe drawing on previous experiences and things you learned on previous projects. Is that accurate, or how would you describe it?
Yeah, I would say so. I think again, it wasn't until as we kind of were in the middle of production that I realized how big the movie was. Because again, it was supposed to be just a small thing. And then even when we made the decision to say, we're going to go forward, we're going to make this bigger and better. By that, I didn't think what we were doing was going to be unmanageable necessarily. I just didn't realize how close it could have come to all collapsing and failing because it was very dependent on the circumstances of locations, of the actors, of schedules, and all that sort of thing. I think working on the other feature films, that really helped me figure out my process for making a feature film and figuring out how I work best and the speed at which we work and what we can and cannot do. And then, of course, with any kind of not seminal film, but any sort of big project, this was definitely a film where we pushed ourselves to our limits essentially. And we kind of broke some things and put it back together. Now we have, you know, new skills that we've learned on this one on how to do things better.
I'm curious if you think you'll find that a challenge moving forward and thinking about, conceptualizing future projects. Do you find yourself feeling like you've kind of reached the limits of what you can do with the current resources? Do you have a desire to push beyond that, or do you think you might kind of go small and try to do something simpler next time?
I definitely don't think we've reached the limits. I think I'm honestly really excited for what we're going to do in the future because
Mhm.
I think there's a lot of aspects of the movie where um, there's parts of the movies where I don't I like it's again it's very ambitious but there's some aspects of it where I think you know we had a big ambition, maybe the film didn't reach that ambition necessarily but it got pretty close, and I'm excited when we do this again we'll do it better. For instance, like the car chase scene, like the way we did that was something that I know I'm excited to do more sequences like that in the future. um and use the way we edited on this project. I just kind of my eyes have been opened by the technology that's out there and what we can accomplish um, without needing much resources. So I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if I make another giant movie um, in the future. I don't know how soon, but yeah, I'm definitely excited to go bigger.
Okay. Yeah, no, I mean you definitely pulled it off here. It was great to see everything coming together. I wondered, speaking of like the car chase scene,
hmm
I was wondering if there were specific, influences or models that you were thinking of there, because during that scene, I was of course thinking of like a movie like Leggett, with the
Yep.
use of still photos, and what a creative way that can be around kind of getting around some of the logistical challenges of when you're trying to shoot it as live action versus being able to use still images. Were
Hmm.
there any, well, I guess first, if you could talk a little bit about that sequence, but going off of it, um, were there any other particular influences that you were drawing on? It's kind of from this more experimental world that helped to make telling this big narrative story possible.
Yeah, so with that sequence in particular, Um, I think two things kind of happened. The first one was I have this film I've been working on called La Danza, which is very experimental. It's very out there, and I do a lot of experimentation in it and with different techniques. And one of those things that I do in that film is I do still images throughout, which I don't think I had done before really in a film, but it was one of those things because a lot of what I'm interested in is the form of cinema and the manipulation of time and space and the formal aspects of movie making. And so it just felt like a very natural thing to do in La Danza, my experimental work, because you're literally stopping time, but then juxtaposing that with the next image, and that's another frozen moment in time. I like that sort of thing. I think cinema, to an extent, much like dance in a way, it's you're sculpting in time. I mean, that's your tool that you don't necessarily have in writing or just, drawing per se. So that was where I kind of got introduced to that idea of playing with that. And when it came time to plan the car chase sequence, we it was Ethan, myself, and Josh Bailey. He just changed his YouTube channel name. It was Unseen Pixels, but his name's Josh Bailey. I think it's Obscurity Films. Um, he's a local filmmaker here. He does a lot of work in Blender. And so we met up with him to kind of discuss how could we make this car chase possible? Because it was originally going to be all for real. In the script, it just says something like, there's a car chase. It's going to be awesome. At the end of it, this happens, essentially. It was like two sentences in the script. Because I needed to know what we could pull off first. And then as we were going through those meetings, I kind of had this inkling of an idea of, it's really, we could make a crazy Fast and the Furious car chase if it was just like a still image. Like it's not difficult to Photoshop the Fast and the Furious, but what's hard is to make it move and to have it be a moving image instead. So I asked them, I was like, so guys, I had this crazy idea. What do you think would be more memorable? Would it be more memorable to just kind of try our best at a real car chase, knowing that we couldn't, I mean, knowing that us just driving on a fast road would be enough? Like, because I mean, again, it wasn't even going to be as good as Operation Avalanche, I suspect. It literally, there was a stretch of road we had. We were probably going to drive down it. The cars probably wouldn't do much. And we would kind of figure out tricks. Would that be more interesting, or would it be more interesting to just do still images and have it cut to a song? And everybody, I mean, Josh and Ethan, they were like, well, I think that cutting it to the song would be more interesting. The still images is kind of an interesting idea. And so that's when it turned into the photo montage, the Legette sequence. I'm glad you said that. Yeah, Legette was definitely something I was thinking of. Um, George Lucas has a short film, I think it's called Look at Life or Look Life or something like that, which
Yeah,
is
yeah, look
another
at life.
one. Um, yeah, I was thinking of a lot of avant-garde cinema, a lot of experimental movies like that. Also, in a weird way, Hollis Frampton, his movies are not they're very they're not at all similar to Little Black Submarines, but I mean he uses stillness quite a bit in his films, and that was something that I was kind of taking influence from. But it was really just I think it was a combination of us needing to be able to pull off something crazy, as well as just my personal interest in playing with the form of cinema.
Yeah, I mean, it works really well. And the reason I keep coming back to that sequence is because as I watched it, I found myself being aware of how my mind basically fills in the blanks. Because
Right.
if you're given a car, we've seen car chases done, hundreds of times in Hollywood, and of course done with, the unparalleled resources that, realistically are very difficult to begin to match on an independent film. But what I really liked was when you're bringing in these experimental, uh, uses of still images. I think it makes us as viewers work a little harder because
Hmm.
in one sense it takes us out of it a little bit because it is a different thing than what we normally see. And so right there, you find yourself thinking about it, and but your mind, at least my mind as I watch it, is really working to fill in the blanks, and it makes me a more engaged and more active viewer, I think, than if I'm just simply sitting back and watching it unfold. And so I really I like that aspect of it because and it probably helps that I'm familiar with some of the types of films you're drawing on there, and some of the ideas that those bring up as well. But yeah, I mean, I thought the whole sequence was really remarkable, and it achieves a real sense of uh, action and energy just through the cutting, certainly through the music, uh,
Hmm.
and other effects that you're bringing in. So yeah, that really stood out to me as one of the highlights. It's also appropriate that the car chase stood out for me so much because this is basically, to me, like it's like a road movie in a lot of ways.
Hmm.
It is these characters going on a journey, and the cars figure so prominently throughout the movie. Was that when you were writing it, did you find yourself thinking of the road, let's call it the road movie, as kind of a structure for it? Is something that you found influencing how you were structuring out the events?
I think to an extent, yeah. I think really what we were drawing, or at least myself, was the Western.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
that was and of course they're never in one place in in the Old West. They're always riding from one town to the next, to this place or that place. Um, but and I think that shares a lot of similarities with the road movie. But now that you say that, yeah, it's like from the second half of the movie, they don't really go to old locations really. They're really on the move. Um, what I was really riffing off of was The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly and The Goonies, essentially. That was kind of the two movies in the front of my mind when I was working on the script and everything with my co-writer. Um, but yeah, like I like the road movie. Like it certainly becomes a motif throughout the movie, just the cars and just they play such a big presence in the movie, don't they?
Yeah. No, I mean it's just nice to see it where you've got the action really moving around, going to different locations. And were these all locations? I am curious about this, um, because of the variety of them. Were these
Mhm.
locations that you had in mind as you were writing, or was it a case of, well, here's the script, now we have to go find all these places?
Yeah, yeah. So most of the locations, well, I'm trying to think. So the key locations, going into the movie, I knew that, like, for instance, I wanted a gunfight or like a big fight scene in the movie at some point. And I knew for that, in terms of houses that we had access to, I knew for sure that we would have Nathan's house. And so that's where that we kind of used Lorenzo's house. That's Nathan's house.
Hmm.
In the Mentor, it had appeared as the boss Jeremy's house. And but due to events in that, Jeremy doesn't own that house anymore. And there was a couple of lines, there were lines that I cut out that kind of explained why Lorenz was living there, but because it didn't really have much to, I mean, it's nice if you're a chlorine fan and you're wondering, oh, wait, he lives here? Why is that? But for this movie isolated on its own, you didn't need it necessarily and kind of slowed the movie down, so we cut it out. But for Nathan's house, I wanted that to be Lorenzo's house because I knew there'd be a fight there. Um, for the abandoned house, that was something that I knew I wanted to use again because that was a location in the Mentor and I knew we had access to it. And so that was written into the script. But let me think. And then the wilderness, that was kind of me relying on the knowledge of the Yakima locals up there. A lot of that stuff just out on the road or on the side of the road. It was just kind of really just like, okay, guys, we need a place where this is set and this is set and this is set. Just find me locations, tell me what you're thinking. Um, so I think aside from Lorenzo's house and the abandoned house, I think everything else was kind of a really natural process of just location scouting and seeing what we had access to.
Yeah, I think they really worked quite well. They were very evocative. I think of the
Mhm.
sort of mood you were going for. I wanted to ask a little bit about the post-production process. I know you
Mhm.
said that the 18 months included your editing, that pretty much took you right up to the time you exported the final film. But how long did you spend specifically in post-production? And did you find that ideas presented themselves as you were editing that you hadn't thought of during shooting, things you could do with the existing footage? Did the film change a lot from, the script to the shooting to the editing? Did you see changes like that happening as you were kind of discovering, the movie as you went along? Just if you could talk a little bit about that process, I'd be curious to know.
Yeah, there's so much to say on the editing of this movie. Editing began the way I work is I like to edit while we shoot. And so when we were up in Yakima, Caleb had a Mac Mini in the back room where we were staying at Nathan's place. And so I would come home from shooting, I would upload the footage, I would import it, I would start cutting right away. And so I think that was July 15th, I want to say, is when we started cutting stuff, or I started editing stuff officially. And from that point on, through shooting, but also after shooting, the movie went through a crazy transformation, um, in many different ways. Because, I think if you looked at the script and then looked at the movie, you would probably just think, oh, they just cut some things down, they cut some stuff out, they didn't get that or that. But what had happened was you have the script, and when you're shooting, you're kind of grabbing your ingredients to cut it together. You have your kind of grocery list, and you're grabbing those things. When you're done shooting, you're like, oh, I missed the garlic, or I missed the oil, or I missed that. And so then you have to, say, shoot, I need to make pasta. How do I do it without garlic and oil? And then you have to kind of rearrange some stuff. And there's a point where I was really butting my head against the wall, thinking like, how do I do anything with this footage that's cohesive? At a certain point, you have to leave behind the script and the movie you were making and just say, what does this footage want to be? And transform it into the best it can be. And so there was a point where the entire movie was going to be edited in a completely different way. I mean, I I was really lost at one point where I was like, okay, let's see what an edit of this movie would look like with no dialogue. It's a silent film. What's a version of this movie where it's told backwards in different orders? Like, because when I get stuck, I just try anything and everything. I rearrange it. I put the first scene of the movie at the very end. I put the last scene up front. I start the movie in the middle. I'll cut out like large portions of the scene. And the solution for a long time was the movie was going to have narration. It was going to be narrated by Lorenzo, and the whole beginning was totally different. There's this big intro to the town of Yakima and what Yakima's like, given by Lorenzo. It had a lot more in common with something like The Big Short or The Wolf of Wall Street at one point. And that was going to be the movie for a really long time until we were in a meeting, kind of getting feedback and everything. And you know, I was okay with it. I didn't love it, because at this point I'm still mourning the movie that could have been that we missed in shooting. Um, but Zach, at one of our last meetings before the picture had to be locked, he said, I'm not vibing with the narration. I hate it. I'm not a fan of this. And having seen the script, having worked with the footage, having flipped it all around and trying to fix these problems that I had, I was like, Zach, I I'll try it because I like to listen to every good idea or any idea I can. Said I'll try it. I don't know if that will work because I think frankly we missed some things in shooting. I don't think we have this coverage or that coverage to make it all make sense. Um, and so I tried it. I took out all the narration. I just spliced it together, and I thought, you know what? This actually gets across what we were getting just fine without the narration. And so from that point on, the I took out all the narration, which was like 4 or 5 months of work, um, and locked the picture in a week or so, something like that. I'm skimming over large details and chunks of things, but the post-production was a really involved process. It was not as simple as just putting it on the timeline and saying, that's good, that's what I had in mind. It was really just like every week, every day, getting some work done on it, trying different things, experimenting, moving footage around, just draining yourself emotionally. It was probably the most intense editing process I've done so far.
I wanted to ask about, well, first, I think that this comment that you made about sort of listening to the footage and letting it be the movie that it wants to be. I think it's
Hmm.
how you put it. I think that's a really great way to think about it. To sort of let the movie find its own shape and to sort of be there to guide it along, but to really see what works best rather than sticking to something that may have been your original vision for it, but that doesn't necessarily work when you get to the editing. So it's really interesting to hear how you, in many ways, discovered the film as much in the post-production as you did in the writing and shooting phases. Um, Before we wrap up, I wanted to ask you something because you had mentioned a couple of times that as you were shooting Little Black Submarines, that became aware of how close everything could have come to just kind of collapsing, and things, thankfully, kept moving. Do you remember a particularly challenging moment, like looking back on it, maybe even something that was just apparent or obvious when you look back on it, where you feel like things really could have, uh, come tumbling down, but you were able to persevere and get through it? Is there anything that stands out to you?
I mean, there's so many things. I think the one, I mean, I'll just go with the first one. So to put a timeline on your in your mind, we were going to shoot on a Saturday. I think it was the 15th of July, I believe. We were going to shoot that Saturday. Our plan was to come up early in the morning on the Friday before. We were going to come up early in the morning on Friday because we wanted to get situated. We wanted to finish up any last minute pre-production tasks to do. So like getting a big tent and tarp for the shoot because it was going to be really sunny, getting food for the crew up in Yakima, um, making sure we had all the props and grabbing anything we needed to. And so our plan was to come up the Friday early morning the Friday before we started shooting, just the day before. Wednesday, before the shoot, before this big trip, I took my car in for an oil change and I got it back. I think it was, well, I think they call me that Thursday and they say, hey, or that Wednesday, and they say, hey, we need your car for another day. Is that okay? And I was like, yeah, sure. They tell me what's wrong with it. Thursday, I'm thinking, great. Still plenty of time. We can leave tomorrow morning still. They call me Thursday and say, "Hey, we got your car, but it's not going to be done until like tomorrow. Like they can't finish it essentially until for a while." And I said, "Well, how long do you need it?" And they said, "Well, we can get it to you Tuesday." And right, so I'm thinking, okay, so that's Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, I'm getting it back and leaving. And that's like 4 or 5 days we're losing of the shoot. I said, I can't do that. And I was like, well, so what's exactly going on? And they broke it down. And essentially what it came down to was they'd taken the car apart. It would take time to put it back together. Everything that makes it drivable was fixed, but they needed more time to work on the AC. And I remember calling Zach and Ethan and I was like, guys, what should I do? Because they told me we can get it to you tomorrow, Friday, when we're supposed to leave, but it won't have AC. And I called my Zach and Ethan. I was like, so what are we gonna do? And they're like, I just get it. No AC. We'll just do the shoot with no AC. Because if we had lost any of those days, the whole thing would have collapsed. We would have lost so much time shooting. So I called up the shop, said, yeah, let's do it. Just I need the car back tomorrow. And they got the car back to me, I want to say at like 2 p.m. on that Friday. So we lost half a day of pre-production. I mean, essentially we lost the entire day of pre-production because of we couldn't leave early in the morning. We couldn't prep for anything. We had to wait around pretty much all day before I could get my car. By the time we left Portland, it was probably around 5-ish or so. And so we were rolling up to Yakima around 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, something like that. And along the trip, there was a car crash on this bridge that goes from Oregon to Washington. Traffic was stalled for 40 minutes. So we essentially lost the entire day of pre-production that we were going to do up in Yakima. But we made it just in the nick of time just to, grab a couple things that we need to get some stuff set in order. And that was day one. That wasn't even like during the shoot. That was the day before shooting. And so there were lots of things like that that happened throughout the shoot where it was like, wow, we almost lost, you know, this entire day. We almost lost this thing or that thing. That was just the first thing that came up. And there are many more things that I'm sure we'll talk about in the future. But yeah.
It really is amazing when you look back and see all these things that come up in a production. It almost seems hard to believe, sometimes that all these different external uh, elements, could come up and yet somehow it gets made.
Yeah.
That's kind of the magic of it. I think that somehow everything has a way of working out, or at least there is creative solutions that come out of it. So I'm glad that I'm glad it didn't stop you from getting things made. Did you before you mentioned, like, when we release this interview, the movie will probably be out. I'm going to try to time it to the release of the film. Is
Mhm.
there anything that you would like people to know if they watch this interview first, and happen to hear this before seeing the movie? Is there anything that you would like people to know about the film before they watch it that you would tell them?
I think I'd just say that, again, this movie was 18 months of my life and to an extent, Ethan and Zach's life as well, and Nathan and Caleb's lives. There's a whole lot of love that went into making of this movie. It was the product of, a team of friends and filmmakers coming together and pulling together all our resources to make something fun and entertaining for everyone. So I guess I would just like people to know that I mean, we tried our best to entertain you and we tried our best to make a big Hollywood movie and just prove that you don't need a big Hollywood money or budget or anything to make a big movie. Um, and so yeah, I guess I would just like people to know, like, hey, we did this to entertain, we did this to kind of prove a point, and we're just, I'm just really excited for people to see it, and hopefully it inspires them to make movies as well.
Great. Well, congratulations on getting it made and on getting it released. The film will be available on the Doomed Productions YouTube channel. I'll make sure to put a link in the description of this video so people can, hopefully more people will find it. Um, do you have any other release plans, any kind of live screenings that you're planning to do in the local area, anything like that?
No live screenings were at this point. We haven't released, well, as of this point, early July, we haven't told anybody, but by the time it's out, we might have mentioned it. But there is going to be a well, I shouldn't say directors. There's going to be an extended version, an extended black and white version of the film released, coming out soon. It is not the preferred version of the movie. It is purely just for educational purposes because we had 50 minutes of deleted scenes when everything was said and done. And I thought, if people saw these scenes on their own, they might think, gee, why did they cut this out? But I think if they saw them in the context of the movie, they would think like, oh yeah, I think I get why that was removed and that sort of thing. So there's going to be an extended black and white version of the movie coming out pretty soon in the next couple weeks, I would imagine. So stay tuned for that, I guess.
That'd be an interesting way to see the deleted footage, still within the context of the overall movie. Well,
Hmm.
again, congrats on getting the film out there, and thank you for your time speaking with me today. And I enjoyed hearing about the film and wish you the best of luck with its release.
Yeah, thanks for having me.